Hi there, my name's David Jamieson. I'm the editor of Contour.Scot. I just wanted to have a wee blether about the news this week that support for Scottish independence, at least according to one Ipsos Mori poll, has reached 58%. Of course, a historic milestone for the cause of Scottish independence. It's very strange to think that just 10 years ago, independence was really a fringe issue in Scottish society. There'd always been, a body of diehards, I suppose, going back decades, who sought Scottish independence. But even when the SNP were halfway through their first administration in Holyrood, it really, it wasn't much of a conversation starter compared to at least what it is now. If you were in what was then the unionist mainstream of Scottish political thought, I suppose you would have viewed it, I probably did myself, view it as a sort of eccentricity, a sort of romantic obsession for a small group of eccentrics. But here we are, 10 years later, partly, it has to be said, due to the many years of hard work and sacrifice, I suppose, by that small minority. And there have been significant changes in the last 10 years that help you understand where that huge base of support has come from. The decline of New Labour under the weight of its own shitness, basically, is one obvious factor. 10 years of austerity is an obvious factor. Brexit as well, though I think often its impact has been overstated, but certainly, the sort of chaos around the Brexit constitutional question, the way in which it's accelerated political polarisation, the way in which many Scots, Scotland being a country that voted by a large majority to remain, have had their voices ignored, and so on. That's obviously been a contributing factor in the rise of support for Scottish independence. But I think that there's one vitally important, overwhelmingly important factor in the rise in support for Scottish independence, and that's the independence movement. The independence movement that emerged between 2012 and 2014, a mass movement, a very creative movement, a very combative movement, which dragged independence really from his obscurity to be the central issue, the pinnacle issue in Scottish political life. No other force could have achieved that. You can't do that just through normal parliamentary politics. You can't do that just by having a popular politician or two. You need that kind of huge mobilization in the base of society to drag something from, 25% support to 58% support. Nothing else, I think, can really do that. I think that's really important for pro-independence socialists and the pro-independence left to remember, because, always in a mass social movement, in a mass political phenomenon, people fight over the interpretation of the movement. And in recent years, you've had a few very conservative interpretations of where Scottish independence has come from. So along the line of, well, this is Britain's punishment for Brexit, as though Scots are these sort of liberal avengers who are taking revenge on Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage with Scottish independence. I think that's to diminish Scottish independence. I think it's much more important and much more interesting than that. I don't think that the independence movement set itself up to minister to the neuroses of liberal cosmopolitan politics down south. Then there's this sort of we're on a journey to independence. You hear this a lot. I think to some people maybe it's comforting in terms of the defeat that we undoubtedly experienced in 2014. Well, it was all just sort of part of the journey that we are on. And I think that's an attitude, a theory of recent historical developments, which seeks to bolster the sort of the very gradualist, evolutionary kind of politics at the top of the SNP. But I don't think it's true. I think that what happened in 2014 is that many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Scots, working class Scots in the main, also kind of lower middle class Scots and so on, took up a fight with the British establishment. And in that first round, we lost. We lost that fight. It wasn't a definitive defeat, of course, because in the years afterwards, the independence movement very much kept rolling, both its kind of parliamentary efforts and on the streets. But inevitably, there have been consequences to that defeat. And I think if you're on the left of the independence movement, you have to reckon with some of those consequences. Here are just two that I think we need to discuss more, and which we've been discussing on the website, Connor.Scot. The first is on the currency question. Now, in the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, the official platform, as it were, the official white paper, advocated a so-called currency union. It was a fudge of the kind of gradualist kinds that I've been discussing. It wouldn't have served the best interests of Scots. But in any case, it was defeated in the referendum. It has subsequently been replaced by something that I would argue is much worse and is not really even comparable, which is stylisation, the product of the SNP Growth Commission report. Also, of course, authored by basically by Charlotte Street Partners, by a business lobby, and it shows the stylisation proposal would leave us without a central bank. It would leave us without the levers that any independent country has over their currency. And that's vitally important for two reasons. The first is that you must have control over your monetary policy if you want to design your economy in a way that delivers any kind of social justice, any kind of wealth, any kind of security to your population. So in Britain, for example, the monetary policy is very much designed with the interest, for example, of the City of London in mind. Now, if we wanted to have a more rational, more balanced, more just economic settlement of almost any kind, of almost any design, we couldn't share that monetary policy. But the second way in which this is vitally important is that in the last 12 years, we've had two utterly catastrophic economic meltdowns in 2008 and now under the weight of the pandemic in 2020. Now, in both of those crises, central banks sort of, rushed to the rescue with huge amounts of liquidity and so on. These are just some of the methods that the economies around the world have used to insulate themselves from the worst impacts of global recession. And during a future independence referendum campaign, the British state campaign, the Unionist campaign, will definitely bring up the fact that Scotland would not have those means at its disposal to protect its economy and its national and social life from the impact of something like a 2008 or a 2020. That's one problem that we face as a consequence of defeat. That at the top of the Scottish National Party, conservative ideas and attitudes have been incubated on the currency front. The second is the European Union, and obviously between 2014 and now, we've seen the UK break away from the EU. Now, the leadership of the SNP obviously saw this as an opportunity to draw in a new layer of support for Scottish independence, on the basis that Scottish independence was now almost as much about European Union membership as anything else. Independence would become the way in which we would access the European Union again. Now, there's a lot of problems with that reframing of Scottish independence. economic. Apart from anything else, of course, it would mean that, I mean, Scotland, an independent Scotland did join the European Union, we'd no longer share a customs area with our largest trading partner in the UK. But besides those economic arguments, and there are many arguments bound up with this, I think there are acute democratic problems, because what we've not had in the last few years is how an independent Scotland would actually join the European Union. And the suspicion is that the quiet is about the fact that for many people at the top of the SNP, the basic idea is that Scotland would be bundled into the European Union through a rapid accession process, or even through a kind of 2 votes in 1 referendum, where we'd both become independent and rejoin the European Union, or rather join the European Union as an independent state for the first time, which I think is an important distinction, because some people will say Scots have already voted by 62% to be members of the European Union. We didn't. Scots voted 62% for Britain to be a member of the European Union, with a highly bespoke relationship to the European Union, of course, not being in the Euro, with many opt-outs that most other countries in the European Union didn't have. So there's a serious prospect that leading figures in the independence movement don't want Scots to have a discrete say on whether or not we're going to join the European Union. I think for socialists in a future independence referendum, then we face a kind of more difficult task than the one that we did in between 2012 and 2014. In those years, you know, there was a strong argument made around the idea of wedding independence to a wider vision of social justice, a more egalitarian society, of working class empowerment, and these sorts of things. And I think that was a very good fight. I think that was a very correct argument to make, and I think it was well made. But I think that our challenges have changed. In a sense, the democratic question above any other is more concretely posed. Because I think that the vision of Scottish independence that the SNP leadership has settled upon is a profoundly undemocratic vision. It's about constructing this new state largely without the say of the Scottish people themselves, without the say of that mass independence movement, constructing it along lines which are acceptable to foreign and domestic elites in institutions like the European Union and NATO, in the Bank of England and on the London money markets. These are the forces that the leadership of the SNP have in mind when they come up with these rather peculiar schemes for Scottish independence, where, you know, major decisions about the future of the Scottish economy would be made in London, in Brussels, in Washington, in Berlin, but not here. And I think that socialists who support independence need to be very concrete in the demands that we're going to make for an independent Scotland. It's not going to be enough to say, well, we'll sort all that stuff out in the elections once the state has been set up. Those elections would take place under a constitutional arrangement that, you know, the ordinary people of Scotland wouldn't have a say in. That's not an acceptable state of affairs. So I think as a bare minimum, we're going to have to argue for an independent currency from day one. There's a lot of confusion around this. You see a lot of people say, well, but it would take some time. Day one of independence, of course, is not the day after we vote for independence. Day one of independence would be several years after the vote for independence. There would be a transition period, just as there has, for example, from the UK leaving Brexit. So an independent currency from day one, I think it means no undemocratic rapid ascension into the European Union and NATO. If people want to argue for those things, then they have to do that. They have to push for a referendum under independence. And a negotiation period which is open and democratic between the vote for independence and the first day of independence. I think that's the bare minimum. And I think we need to make those concrete demands for the mass independence movement. But those are just my thoughts on this historic week, and we obviously want to hear from you. Please do send us your articles, give us your feedback, give us a wee comment underneath this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Like and subscribe, I believe they say. And yeah, I look forward to hearing your thoughts and speaking to you again soon.